going to move into Q&A from the audience. We have about 20 minutes to do that. So Erica, I'm going to hand it over to you quick to facilitate this part of the discussion.
Sure, thanks. Thank you for all the good questions. There's a lot of questions, and some of our interns actually had some of the answers to some of the questions. So thank you to them too. So I hope that you all are reading the chat because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Made my job harder because then I was like, oh, I was going to ask that question. Now I check it off. Now you guys answered it. So that's awesome. One of the questions in here was about the primary, and it said, what are you hearing about pushback in the primary from how voter information will be disseminated to the parties afterward?
Whoever asked that question, are you referring to the presidential primary that we had in February that had some party data issues? I assume that that is what they're referring to versus the August primary. Does anyone want to unmute and...
You could clarify that. I mean, it really is a different situation.
Yes,
the answer was yes. That's what I'm asking about. What did you hear about pushback there?
Lots. So just so folks are aware, we had that presidential nominating primary for the first time in February this year, back when election administrators thought that was going to be the hardest thing that we did this year. Instead of like the August primary where you get one ballot and you pick which party you vote, you had to let folks know ahead of time and get either a Republican Party or a DFL party ballot and vote. And that information was collected, saved, and given to the political parties because of a recordation rule from the RNC and the DNC. The short answer is just tons of pushback. Everyone does not like that, including Steve. The only people who do like it are the RNC, the DNC, and the legislators who write those laws in Minnesota. And so we did have some changes around who has access to that data. But for example, even if you vote in the Republican primary, that data that you voted in the Republican primary is still given to the DFL party, as well as the other two major parties that we have in Minnesota right now, the two marijuana-based parties. And so Steve would like to at least see that, you know, much like a caucus sign-in sheet, you sign in and say like, yes, I'm here as a Republican at this caucus, that information would only go to the Republican Party. Steve and election administrators that we have connected to across the state would like that to not to be like the August primary. I don't know whether or not there's going to be, it's just a matter of what the legislature does and doesn't want to do around that. So
Jamie, just to clarify quick though, that does not have any impact in the upcoming primary or the general. There will not be party designation. Thank you so much. Yep. Thank you.
I think maybe just off of that point in general, there's been a few questions about just how do we switch the narrative in general when we are talking about this to encourage people, because there's a lot of different messages going on about voting by mail and whether it's good or bad, and you know, just what are some like good talking points around this discussion that seems so loud right now? What are some good things to say to people? I mean, you've already said some, but what are some of the main talking points to say to people
around voting from home?
Yeah, and why people should consider it, and yeah.
Patty, feel free to jump in anytime. So we are quite aware that there is just a lot of questions around voting from home. And I did see that there were a lot of questions in the chat over here about some of the technicalities. So I want to make sure we do get to answering those. There's a lot around this narrative of whether or not voting from home is safe. Folks who would like to think that it has a lot of fraud in it and speak around that. Our office, I don't know if I have too many tips out of the gate. Our office communications department is going to be putting together some materials around this and already has a little bit around just talking points around why it is safe, what parts of it are happening that are and are not fraud. There's not fraud in it, and explaining why there isn't. You know, it's kind of the simple things people talk about, ballot harvesting, like, oh, I got my ballot in the mail today, so I'm going to run up and down the street and pull all my neighbors out of their mailboxes, and I'm going to vote them and turn them in. But when you vote absentee from home or vote by mail, you put your name and personal identification on the outside of one of the envelopes. So either your driver's license or the last four of your social, and that has to match what your local elections office has on record. And so the idea that you could just have a lot of ballots out and about being filled out and turned in is just kind of not really what happens around that idea, that each individual person submits one that's attached to their identifying numbers, and there's not really a way to just like throw a bunch of filled out ballots and have them all be counted. So that's kind of one of the bigger talking points, but I would also just say look to our office to be putting out materials around that over the next month or so that folks can share and disseminate how they want to.
Yeah, and sorry to jump in again. This is Teresa. Jamie, can you talk about the ballot tracker? I think that gives people some assurance.
Oh, yeah. It's not as intense as when you order a package from Amazon and it tells you every single step of where it's moving. But we do have a ballot tracker, so you can go on our website, jump in, put in your name, your birthday, and your identification number, and it'll pull up. So for example, when I punch mine in now, it pulls up and it says your ballot was received on this specific date and will be counted. So that once you've mailed it in, you can watch for that and see that it was received to be counted by the county. Do we want to get into some of these technical questions at the same time here? Go ahead, Patty.
Well, I was just going to add, you know, we mail those ballots out, and if you requested it is when you have to have an identifying number. If you vote by mail, if your precinct automatically sends the ballot out, there's no identifying number. So I understand why people are having some angst about that. But I can give a little anecdote here. We've been doing it in Blue Earth County forever too, since the 90s. And we've had one case where the mom decided to vote her daughter's ballot when she was away at college. And the daughter then voted in person on campus. And so that got caught, and the mother did get prosecuted. So every once in a while, a mother decides to take over her child's ballot. It happens. They don't think they're going to vote, and they want to make sure they know how they want to vote. So that's the only issue we've had in Blue Earth County in 20 years.